Good afternoon. Today we'll be reading Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. paper on the influence of the mystery religions of Christianity, but we're going to call it the influence of ancient Egypt on Christianity. It was written on 1949 November. Here's the prelude from a person writing about the critiquing the paper. It says, King wrote this paper for the course development of Christian ideas taught by Davis. That's his professor. The essay examines how Christianity developed as a distinct religion with a set of central tenets and how it was influenced by those pagan religions it assimilated. King repeats material from an earlier paper, A Study of Mithraism. He extends the discussion here to the influence of other mystery religions. Davis gave King an A on the essay, stating, "This is very good. I am glad to have your conclusion. It is not so much that Christianity was influenced by the mystery cults or borrowed from them, but that in the long process of history, this religion developed. Christianity, is the expression of the longing of people for light, truth, salvation, and security. That is what the study you have made. We see the philosophy of both religion and history underneath all expression, whether words, creeds, cults, ceremonies, is the spiritual order, the ever-living search of man for higher life, a fuller life, more abundant, satisfying life. That is essential. Never stop with the external, which may seem like borrowing, but recognize it is the perennial struggle for truth, for the life itself. So through experience, knowledge, as through other forms, the outer manifestations of religions change. The inner spiritual continues forever." Okay, now we're about to start out the King paper he wrote. The influence of Osiris and Isis. The Egyptian mysteries of Isis and Osiris exerted considerable influence upon early Christianity. These two great Egyptian deities who worship passed into Europe were revered not only in Rome, but in many other centers where Christian communities were growing up. Osiris and Isis, so the legend runs, were at one time and the same time brother and sister, husband and wife, but Osiris was murdered. His confined body being thrown into the Nile, and shortly afterwards, the widow and exiled Isis gave birth to a son, Horus. Meanwhile, the coffin was washed up on the Syrian coast and became miraculously lodged in the trunk of a tree. This tree afterwards chanced to be cut down and made into a pillar in the palace at Babylos, and where Isis at length found it. After discovering Osiris' dismembered body, Isis restored him to life and installed him as king of the netherworld. Meanwhile, Horus, having grown to manhood, reigned on the earth, later become the third person of this great Egyptian trinity. In the records of both Herodotus and Plutarch, we find that there was a festival held each year in Egypt celebrating the resurrection of Osiris. While Herodotus fails to give a date for this festival, Plutarch says it lasted 4 days, giving the date as the 17th day of the Egyptian month Hathor, which according to the Alexandrian calendar used by him corresponded to November 13th. Other Egyptian records speak of another feast in honor of the dead, when such lamps were lit, which was held about November 8th, It is interesting to note that the Christian feast of All Souls in honor of the dead likewise falls at the beginning of November. And in many countries, lamps and candles are burned all the night on that occasion. There seems little doubt that this custom was identical with the Egyptian festival. The festival of All Saints, which is held one day before that of All Souls, is also probably identical with it in origin. This still stands as a festival in the Christian calendar, and thus Christians unconsciously perpetrate the worship of Osiris in modern times. However, this is not the only point at which the religion of Osiris and Isis exert influence on Christianity. There can hardly be any doubt that the myths of Isis had a direct bearing on the elevation of Mary, the mother of Jesus, to the lofty position that she holds in Roman Catholic theology. As is commonly known, Isis had two capacities which her worshippers warmly commended for her. Firstly, she was pictured as the Lady of Sorrows, weeping for the dead, Osiris, and secondly, she was commended as the Divine Mother, nursing her infant son, Horus. In the former capacity, she was identified with the great mother goddess Demeter, whose mourning for Persephone was the main feature in the Eleusinian mysteries. In the latter capacity, Isis was represented in tens of thousands of statues and paintings, holding the divine child in her arms. Now, when Christianity trumped up, we found that these same paintings and figurines became those of the Madonna and Child, with little or no difference. In fact, archaeologists are often left in confusion in an attempt to distinguish one from the other. It is also interesting to note that in the 2nd century, a story began to spread stating that Mary had been miraculously carried to heaven by Jesus and his angels. In the 6th century, a festival came to be celebrated around this event known as the Festival of Assumption, and it is now one of the greatest feasts of the Roman Catholicism. It is celebrated annually on August 13th. But it is this very date that the festival of Diana and Artemis are celebrated, with whom Isis was identified. Here we see how Mary gradually came to take the place of the goddess. And in the notes he says, the spreading of this story was attributed to Matillo Bishop Sardis. And Dr. King also, his quotes in this, he gets one from a book called Paganism and Our Christianity by the author name of Weigall, Weigall. And that's his main source. So, in his earlier paper. So that's the paper on Dr. King with the history of Egypt. So you can clearly see that he definitely had an idea.